Welcome to Witch Hunt. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack.
In this episode, we are joined by Dr. Preethi Lolaksha Nagaveni, who discusses how India's caste system interacts with supernatural belief to trigger witchcraft allegations and violence against the country's most vulnerable people, the Dalits, or untouchables.
Be aware there are references to violence against women, including sexual violence.
While the journey through such topics is tough, it leads us to greater empathy and action. By confronting these issues, we can work towards meaningful change.
We welcome Dr. Preethi Lolaksha Nagaveni.
I'm currently working as a lecturer in law at University of Lincoln in England. And I have done my PhD from Lancaster University pretty recently. My thesis was on untouchability with studies on manual scavenging and caste-based discrimination in higher educational institutions in India. And I've done my LLM from University of Reading, also in the UK, and my BA LLB honors, and I'm a gold medalist from National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, which is like really top university in India, a law university in India. And I've been working in this area of caste and untouchability for quite a few years now, particularly because it was a focus of my PhD thesis. And even when I was a student at National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, I did have an opportunity to work with some of the constitutional bodies in India, like the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, which has been established to look after and protect the rights of the marginalized communities such as scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, or what we call as Dalits and advocacies in common parlance.
You mentioned the Dalits and the advocacy. Can you tell us who they are?
It actually goes back centuries. So in order to understand what they are, we need to understand the institution of caste, which is one of the most exclusive features of the Indian society and particularly the Hindu social order. And it's perhaps one of the longest surviving social hierarchies in the whole world. And this hierarchy reflects complexity and stratification as it situates people in a very complex hierarchical order. So I would like to take the definition of caste, which is given by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who is the father of the Indian Constitution, the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, and the first law minister of independent India. He defines caste in India as an artificial chopping off of the population into fixed and definite units, each one prevented from fusing into another through the custom of endogamy, that is marriage from within the community. So the conclusion is inevitable that endogamy is the only characteristic that is peculiar to caste. This is what he says. And he says that if one succeeds in showing how endogamy is maintained, one can practically prove the genesis and mechanism of caste. In ancient times, with the Hindu social order, how it was, we had 4 varnas called the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. You have to go through the ancient texts like the Vedas to understand where this is stemming from. One of the earliest revolutions of this, you can find it in the Vedas, or the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda, which is one of the ancient Hindu texts. Basically, it divides the society into 4 categories. And these 4 categories are never to be equal socially or with regard to their rights and privileges. They must always be based on a graded scale. The graded inequality was the very essence of it. So there must be a division of occupation according to it. And a right to education was available only to the top 3 varnas. The Shudra, the 4th varna, and women of all varnas were denied education. So the varna system was set in stone by the Brahmins, who are the priestly class, who are on top of the varna system, without any cracks or loopholes. Inequality exists in every society. But the inequality preached and practiced by Brahmins, a priestly class, is an official doctrine of Brahmanism. It was opposed to the very concept of equality, and its soul lays in graded inequality. Until untouchability came into being, the Shudras were the lowest in terms of the Hindu social order. This was until untouchability came into being. But with the intermixture of varnas, so over time there have been very many sexual relations or intermarriages, even though it's prohibited in text. These things did happen. And these intermixtures gave rise to new castes, and castes such as Chandalas came to be known as untouchables, and they were the lowest of all. They were considered the lowest of all. Now, they were the outcasts. Now, they lived and suffered at the bottom of the Hindu caste hierarchy for centuries. They were segregated, discriminated against, and humiliated in the name of God and religion. The untouchables were forced to live in degrading environment. They were denied a life with dignity. Their values, culture, and traditions were suppressed. Having a decent education was a distant dream to these communities. They were economically deprived, socially excluded, and politically marginalized. And they were forced to live a life of surrender to the dominant caste. The untouchable women were forced to become prostitutes for dominant caste patrons and village priests as devdasis. So sexual abuse and other forms of violence against women were often used by landlords and police to crush any type of dissent. This untouchability, you can see it throughout the dark pages of Indian history. And it's been there through every king's regime. And one of the harshest times were seen in the 18th century during the Peshwa regime. The Peshwas were called the Chitpavan Brahmins, the priestly class. During that time, untouchables were not allowed to use public streets lest a Hindu was coming along so that his shadow would pollute the Hindus. The untouchables had to identify themselves by wearing a black thread either on their wrist or around their neck as a prevention so that Hindus do not get themselves polluted by touching them by mistake. So they had to also carry strung from their waist a broom to sweep away behind themselves the dust they trod on, lest a Hindu walking on the same dust should be polluted. So they were also required to carry an earthen pot hung around their neck wherever they went for holding their spit, lest the spit falling on the earth should pollute a Hindu who might unknowingly happen to tread on it. Such a system continued to exist despite the change in the regime, and you can see how barbaric this is. So the untouchables later came to be called as scheduled castes under the Indian Constitution and Dalits in common parlance. And the tribal population came to be called as scheduled tribes under the Constitution and advocacies in common parlance.
And how does the population compare between the castes? How many Dalits are there?
250 million. 250 million. That's 25% of the Indian population. So that's a huge number of population. Yeah. 250 million. I'm sure it's, I don't know, it might be even the size of some of the smaller countries. So it's a huge number of population, but it's a very silent and marginalized population, which doesn't have much voice because the provision of the Constitution came, as you said, in 1950. And from then, the people started getting access to education. So it's the first generation or first or second generation learners are coming from the Dalit communities now. So it's a huge disparity, and we have to fight against centuries of oppression. You can see how difficult it is. And now we are able to articulate our views and our thoughts, but it has not been like this before. Now, like in the 21st century.
What kind of work do the Dalit perform generally?
Historically, traditionally, as per the Hindu religious texts, the Dalits are supposed to perform the so-called menial and polluting tasks, such as cleaning dry latrines, open and closed sewers, gutters, carrying human corpses, carrying dead animals, tanning leather, things like that. But over time, Dalits have tried to come out of these occupations, but it's not so easy.
And the Dalit, there are other abuses, including witch hunts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, witch hunting is one of the very important ways in which Dalit women have been hunted down in the past so many centuries. While both Dalit men and women are subjected to various kinds of hardships and handicaps, Dalit women face a triple threat of caste, class, and gender. They are molested and raped by dominant caste men who, as I said, enjoy impunity. And witch hunting or witchcraft, because of these accusations of witchcraft, Dalit women are abused and humiliated and even murdered because of this accusation. Now, witch hunting, as you know, is a very violent form of witchcraft belief. And women, Dalit women in particular, are hunted down on the accusations of witchcraft. Now, the victims, they suffer physically, psychologically, and economically. Now, globally, when we speak about witchcraft or witch hunting, we say the patriarchal mindset is as one of the chief reasons for witch hunting. But in India, with patriarchy, there's a combination of caste and class, with caste often emerging as a dominant reason for the practice of witchcraft and witch hunting of Dalit women. And I've heard the activists claim that the accusations of witchcraft against Dalit women are often used as a common way to kill them. And most of the victims of witchcraft have been old widows and single women. And common reasons for accusing a woman of witchcraft range from personal disputes or enmities, even sexual desire and coveting properties. And historically, the bodies of Dalit women have always been used as a tool for suppression by the privileged caste. Our Indian history has witnessed how Dalit women had to pay tax to cover their breasts, which was often not affordable to them. So such was the cruel and inhuman treatment of Dalit women, which has very, very few parallels in Indian history. And coming to witchcraft, the women accused of witchcraft are often blamed for calamities, epidemics, and other misfortunes which befall the societies. And victims suffer mental and physical brutality in very shocking forms like lynching, parading naked, social ostracization, and even being burnt alive by mobs. And activists often claim that accusations of witchcraft have been made only on Dalit women, and privileged caste women have not been victims of such practice. And also, vast majority of Dalit women in rural India are, as I said earlier, they are poor and landless, and they are daily wage laborers, and they lack access to basic amenities and entitlements. So they are subjected to patriarchal structures, both in the general community and within their own families. And these women, they face multiple challenges, including lack of access to resources, lack of educational opportunities, land, essential services, and even justice. So in rural areas, a Dalit woman lives in terror and fear because she knows that dominant caste people can target her anytime to seek revenge or just assert authority or just simply to suppress. There is an intersection of several factors here. There is caste, there is class, there is gender, and there are also other issues like superstition, which we shouldn't overlook because superstition and witchcraft goes hand in hand. And there are other things like illiteracy and poverty as well. So these are all like these vicious factors, it makes a vicious circle around Dalit women. And they are hunted down and they have been killed. And so many hundreds of unreported incidents have happened in every state in India. And after being declared a witch, they are tortured, harassed, they're ostracized and physically tortured. They're banished from the village. And even in some cases, they're forced to consume human excreta. And they're also subject to gang rape as a punishment for witchcraft. There are very few punishments for all these kind of crimes, they are literally crimes, isn't it? There is gang rape, there is murder, and just discriminating against Dalits. It attracts so many provisions of Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act. But they are not seen as such. And because the whole structure is such that the perpetrators, they enjoy impunity. The thing with untouchability in the practice of this inherited forms of discrimination is Babasaheb Ambedkar himself remarked that when a Hindu migrates outside India, Indian caste system and the problem of untouchability will acquire a global dimension. So it has already happened. Now, the Hindus from India have migrated to various countries, and there also we find problems of untouchability.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.